Hello, everybody, and welcome to an edition of Let's Talk. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons, and we're going to be talking politics in city of Spokane Valley today. With me is our guest and candidate for re-election to the Spokane Valley City Council. He's Rod Higgins. And Rod, we welcome you to the program today.
Thank you, Mike.
So we have a city that's growing unbelievably. I mean, when Spokane Valley was first formed, there was just a little under 80,000 people that were interested in forming that city. They formed it, and now you're almost 25, 30% higher than that, and it's still growing.
Well, you put in percentages, let's put it in numbers. It's over 100,000. And we're growing rapidly because of things like Amazon coming in and stuff like that. Case in point, our industrial park, which at one point, before maybe 3-4 years ago, was the largest industrial park between Minneapolis and Seattle.
That's right.
We increased the size by 500 acres, and do you know that that is about 90% full right now? So, no, we're not stopping growing. We just need space to grow.
Well, the good news is, though, Spokane Valley has industry and opportunity going with it. It's not a retirement community. It's not a bedroom community. It's got its own economic engine going, and of course that's something that requires some management as well.
Absolutely, yes.
How much of a problem is that with respect to where the council comes into the picture? What kinds of policy issues are causing you either to be held back or giving you some freedom to make some decisions? What kind of restrictions are you dealing with?
Well, there were some disturbing moves in the last legislative session here in Washington, and that is that the legislature was talking about getting into management of zoning and things like that, doing away with our various zones that we do locally, that it's not a case of we know best, they apparently think they do. And I think that would wreak havoc with what we have now. Right now, we have a lot of complaints from people who have been in the valley for a long time and remember it as a nice, rural, relaxed, laid back. Well, we've crossed 100,000, and that changes. I mean, the number might seem simple, but it changes the entire psyche of the city, sort of, in that we're now moving down a road toward being a larger city. And you know what happens then? Your traffic starts getting tied up. You're complaining about a lot of apartments and stuff like that. No small part of which is a simple matter of economics. Housing is getting too expensive. And so what's the default position? A rental of some kind. Okay? And that's kind of where we are.
And in Spokane Valley, as in many cities in the Northwest, rental inventory is almost non-existent. It's pretty difficult to find places, and even home values have skyrocketed in light of the fact that inventories are so small with respect to them as well. How do you manage that when this whole pandemic thing winds down, if it ever will? We're going to be dealing with a situation where you guys out there in Spokane Valley are going to have to make some pretty serious decisions about how you're going to manage the property ownership and the various equities associated with that.
Well, the very thought of government managing property ownership is an anathema.
Frightening.
Yes, it is. We're not equipped to be in that business. We ought not to be in that business. And as long as I'm in council, we will be steering clear of that.
But there's some folks on that council who don't agree with that. They do think that government's role to deal with that is an appropriate thing.
That's the majority right now.
Yeah.
That's why we need the majority back.
So that type of management, but also the state, as you mentioned, made decisions about localities and municipalities that probably ought to have been left to municipalities themselves, and they have a sort of an appetite for wanting to do more of that.
Absolutely. They didn't get that bill through this time,
Right.
but they'll take another bite at that apple. You know they will. And they keep chewing on it, and they'll get it through eventually. And it won't be pretty when it happens.
What would you suggest is the single most important problem the council ought to be aware of and doing something about? And that you would, in fact, seek to affect leadership in that area?
Two things. First of all is public safety. The current environment for law enforcement in this country, not just here, in this country, is very sad. But it's leading to a problem that we have, and so does a whole bunch of other municipalities, I'm sure. We don't have enough policemen. We're a contract city,
Right.
and we contract with the sheriff for our policemen. Okay? And right now, we're probably 10 or so under what we ought to be. And it's being reflected in, and I'll get to this in just a second with point number 2, with our ability to control traffic, stuff like that, simple things. The second problem is homeless. You're familiar with the Ninth Circuit decision, the Boise decision that said
Yes.
if you don't have a place to put homeless people, you can't move them. Have you ever seen or heard of anything quite so asinine as that? It was
The Ninth Circuit is pretty famous for asinine, though. You got to remember
Well-
that. They're the most reversed circuit in all of the United States. But,
we were hoping it went to the Supreme Court, and they refused to hear
they
it.
didn't hear it. Didn't mean they didn't want to reverse it. They didn't want to deal with it,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Yes, they're right.
Well, and here we are, okay? We are trying to deal with it. City of Spokane has been dealing with it. We get money from the federal government, from the state government to deal with homeless. We usually transfer it or give it to the county, who in turn gives it to the city, who I don't think has used the money that wisely because they seem to be attracting homeless, not from the local area necessarily, but from as far as the Midwest, that we've been able to find people who have come here. Question is why? Benefits. Well, there's an old economic axiom. If you want more of something, subsidize it. And that seems to be what we're doing.
Of course, that's a statewide issue as well. That's found virtually everywhere. And, the needle exchange programs, things of that nature, make it very attractive to come here. And the climate in general is favorable to a certain extent, as notwithstanding the kind of heat we've been having. But there are worse places you can be homeless. Let's put it that way.
Well, it wasn't that long ago we were looking for places to get them out of the cold. Now we've got 180 degrees. Not
Let's go back to
temperature-wise.
public safety for the
Yes.
aspect of the contract with the Spokane County Sheriff's Department. The Sheriff's Department has one of the worst officer per thousand population ratio going in this region, and of course they're the ones that are offering a portion of their officers to you folks as a police force for Spokane Valley. There's been a conversation a long time about whether the Spokane Valley City should have its own police force or should they continue the contract. Where are you on that one?
At an impasse. That conversation, you're right, has been going on for some time. At 100,000 people, you're now approaching, maybe you ought to be in charge of your own destiny. On the other hand, hey, we are very, very frugal, okay? Can we get a better deal doing it ourselves? I don't think we've ever, put our foot in that water realistically.
Is it time for an evaluation of that possibility?
It might be. As I say, at 100,000, the face
It's a
of
lot
the
of
city
people.
changes, yes.
Makes you roughly the fifth largest city in Washington, yes? Or
No, I
thereabouts?
think the 10th. believe it
10th
or not.
largest?
Yeah,
Still, you're headed toward 5. I mean, if it continues to grow like that.
yes.
So there is, what you're saying is there's a breaking point, basically, where you're simply going to have to make a determination as to whether this contract really works in the best interest of the
Yes.
community. Where are we with respect to how close to that we are?
I haven't really heard anybody talk openly about it. In the past, I know it became a campaign issue maybe 4 years ago. People were accusing candidates of, in fact, I might have been one of them, of wanting to get out of that contract and do it ourselves. At the time, it didn't make sense, you know, because you're looking at front money of having to do cars, to do equipment, to hire everybody, to staff up for it. And one of the things that we're very proud of is that for as many people we have in population, our staff is under 100 people to administer that. I think it's a 98 and a fraction of a person. Do you realize that we would more than double that in one fell swoop by having our own police department?
Yeah, you would have to be able to have having the sheriff's department relationship does have some benefits to it because
Yes.
there's some shared responsibility there.
Sure.
That wouldn't be the case if you were to go independently.
Right.
Now, relative to the protection of the community in this period of growth, is there a diminishing protection there? Is officer response time falling to the degree where you now have to wait a whole long time in order to get help if you need it?
I don't know that we've actually measured that. I would surmise that yes, there probably is. Let's case in point. You remember a while back we had a riot downtown here?
In the city of Spokane?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. And they were calling for help. I think Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls,
Right.
the Valley sent some. That's kind of scary because when the Valley sends some, we're uncovered.
Yes.
Okay. And remember at that time, those people, they're not dumb when they go riot. This isn't a pick-me-up riot. This is a planned affair. Remember, they went to Coeur d'Alene and they were confronted by citizens bearing arms?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is that where we're going? God, I hope not.
Yeah, you have to, but then at some point, I mean, you share fire resources as well. I mean, there's a agreement of with respect to various fire departments and fire districts relative to the size of some type of a fire, and sometimes the Spokane Valley Fire Department finds itself in a different territory,
You bet. Yes.
and sometimes other fire departments find themselves in your territory.
Well,
That works better for firefighting than it does for policing, doesn't it?
so far,
Yeah.
so far, unless you're going into a riot area where they're laying for those people. And that's a whole different ballgame, too.
When you're on the campaign trail, what's the number one thing people are telling you? Rod, we got to do this. What is this?
Well, police, the same things I just said. And people are getting mightily irritated with going to the park with their kids or grandkids. The restroom is locked, or if it's not, there are homeless in there. We have regulations against in various places, Balfour being one of them, but we don't seem to be enforcing them. Okay? So
Is that because of the lack of resources to enforce or lack of will to enforce?
I'd like to say resources, but I'm not so sure about the other either. Okay? That's another thing that I'd like to
So there may
address.
be a desire to just turn your head and I see nothing.
There might be some of that going on. I don't know. I'm not literally boots on the ground, but from the comments that I'm hearing, from my own observations, yes, I think there is some of that.
Let's talk a little bit about infrastructure. All right.
Yeah.
There's a constant need to refurbish the infrastructure in most municipalities all the time, and that being the case, Spokane Valley is certainly not exempt from that. But Spokane Valley was a rural area for the longest time, and the street layouts and the developments that have occurred subsequently to it being a rural character, the land there has resulted in sort of a hodgepodge of where to build the streets, how to do the streets, and who's responsible to pay for it. What's happening with respect to that? It still seems to be a little bit less than nailed down.
Well, whenever you get grants from government, you've got to do it according to a plan. In this case, a TIP, Transportation Improvement Plan. We have a 6-year plan going along with that. What happens when you do that is that you lay out what you're going to do for 6 years. Of course, you'll amend it from time to time to pick up things that need immediate attention. But in the meantime, you're looking at county roads that, when they were put in, were rural, didn't have all of the basis that you would for an industrial area or something like that. So we're gradually replacing those as we can. We've done I think, an admirable job in the industrial parks, both of them, to get that done. One of the major problems with infrastructure right now are rail crossings. I know we like to call them grade crossings, but nobody seems to know what that is.
Not anymore, that's true.
Okay, so when you're trying to cross a railroad track, it's a rail crossing. And you're going to do it either below the track or you're going to do it over the track. In this case, over the track at Barker. When we get to Pines, it'll be under the track, like Argonne. And that is something that has been a thorn in our side since inception, since before inception. And the trains coming from the east, more than 100 cars, and there's enough of them that there's one coming through about every 10, 15 minutes. Now try doing something if you're a student at Pines Elementary, North Pines Elementary, and you're walking from, a home across Trent and stuff like that. That's not good. It just isn't. Okay. By putting Pines in, and we're working mightily, we've got a lot of our own money in that right now, in that if we're trying to attract a federal grant like we did for Barker, if you got your own skin in the game, they're much more likely to entertain helping you out. And so we've been steadily increasing and getting it ready. This old thing about shovel ready, well, that was an illusion. However, at the federal level. However, we're trying to make it happen here. We've got access, we've got right-of-way, we've got money, and the engineering is largely done. Okay, so
You recall this was some years ago now, the move to a project or program called Bridging the Valley, which had to do with getting vehicles and railroad equipment separated so that the blockages didn't occur and the collisions didn't occur and that the crossings would be safe. And there was a variety of resource money supposed to come from the federal, the state, the local governments, and what have you. Hardly ever hear comment about that anymore. The idea was it would go from Bonner's Ferry all the way to west of Spokane, and there wouldn't be any major crossings over the railroad tracks. There have been a few major crossings that have, of course, been replaced with over or unders that have moved that theory forward, but a lot still remains to be done. Is it a lack of funds for that?
yes.
Where's the blockade? Because the feds were talking about stepping in and doing a whole lot, but we haven't seen much federal money in that area.
No, we haven't, and we've seen even less railroad money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the railroads are more than happy to let you do it.
Oh, certainly, yes.
They have the right of way for 100 years. And you got a problem, you fix your problem.
They're not going to do it because they don't have to.
They don't have to stop either.
Yeah, that's true.
Why would? But you would think that they would want to cooperate to some degree.
Well, back to your question about bridging the valley. Great idea at the time. I think somebody looked at the price tag and said, whoops. And that's about as far as it went, because we are on our own for each of these separate things. And we were very fortunate to get Barker done, and that triggered a lot of the expansion into the second industrial park. Pines, from a safety standpoint, is the #1 unaddressed rail crossing in the state. And yet the legislature has been slow to do anything about it. But
Well, they are spending a whole lot more money on rail and automotive or vehicular conflicts in Western Washington per capita than they are here, on the theory, obviously, that the population is there and more money gets spent on highways and that sort of a thing. But the real serious problems aren't over there. They're here.
Well, you just make an interesting point here. If you have occasion to travel in Western Washington, you'll notice a couple things right off. The roads are better, okay, and that's not just in the Seattle area, that's up and down the coast, okay? That they are, state money is obviously better attended over there because it doesn't come across the mountains. The Cascades seem to be a greater barrier than just, a mountain barrier, a geographic barrier. Because the governor, for instance, there seemed to be a feeling that he was penalizing us in the COVID thing and opening and stuff like that. I don't know if, I suppose there are some folks in Tacoma that probably thought they were treated badly in all of this with the various closures and shutdowns and stuff. Nevertheless, I kind of think because we didn't vote for him, we paid a price.
That's been a problem all along, and it could have a political overtone, as you allude. But the reality of it is that many more dollars per capita are taken from Eastern Washington or returned to Eastern Washington, except for a few places like Republic, for example, which probably gets more money back from the state when it comes to highways than they pay in, because of, there are those. But when you're talking 100,000 population and what have you, it isn't a dollar for dollar situation or anywhere near it. And they're spending an awful lot of money on Washington State ferries and on fixing bridges over in Western Washington, the Olympic Peninsula, Kingston, Snohomish, Pierce County, and that sort of thing. But not quite as much of a sentiment to get things done east of the Cascades, which has been, by the way, a plight we've had to deal with for decades over here.
I would guess every state has a problem like that. Yeah. Idaho, it's North Idaho versus Boise. Oregon, it's east versus west, same as here. Another area, by the way, you just pointed it out, drug money. The state is making a whale of a lot of money, and they are very, very stingy with allocating it back out again. When we legalized it, we were going to do great things and stuff. Hasn't really happened. I think most of that money found its way into the general fund one way or another, and that's where it disappeared.
There's a history of finding its way into the general fund in Washington State, whereas that was the lotteries were sold on the theory that there was going to be a lot of money spent on education, what have you. Well, it was spent on education, but it kept shrinking. That sort of thing happens a lot. You mentioned the word a psychological impact when you were talking about an unrelated issue, but let's get back to the fact that the city of Spokane Valley has no city center. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you drive through any city, the next 4 exits are the city center, right? Big or small in most parts of the state. But you get to Spokane Valley, and it'll say, X number of exits to Spokane Valley, but where's the city center? And there isn't really, psychologically, there is no city center. Whether you're an old resident of that region or you're a new resident, there never has been. Now then, will there ever be?
I think not, because go back in history, and you're well aware of this, how the valley grew, okay? The valley grew as farmland. Right. There were small farming communities that when Spokane started making, the city of Spokane started making overtures about annexing parts of the valley, that was where, although there were 4 or 5 failed attempts to incorporate, that was the kicker that pushed them over the edge, and it passed in 2003. We became a city. But we're still, in some ways, those small areas, those small farming communities. Now, will we ever have a city center? I don't think so, because of the way that we've grown up. Will we have a community center? I think yes, because it's built around, we're trying to design it around with, together with a library and a very nice park, a community center. But a business center with high-rise buildings and stuff like that, probably not, at least not in my lifetime.
What will be the impact of the new Amazon facility out there? I know that when they get things up and running, that it's going to be one of the largest employers in Eastern Washington.
Mhm. Well, like so many things, be careful what you wish for, because 1,000 people that they're going to employ, uh, that will bring maybe that many again that you're going to have services for. The traffic patterns here, before I get off on that, let me finish with the Amazons and stuff. We're still trying to attract those. That's one of the reasons why I say we've got to expand, and the Urban Growth Management Act is a real restrictive thing. It was designed for the West Coast, and it really doesn't have an application here, and it is hurting us
It's a
badly.
boat anchor. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a millstone around your neck.
Exactly.
Your choices are very limited.
Yes. Yes. And so,
And there doesn't seem to be much sympathy in the legislature to reverse that.
because we're on the west side of the state,
Not the west side of the state, yeah.
excuse me, the east side of the state.
Right.
You're making a case for the 51st state. Be careful now.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I don't think that's a practical response.
Well, I
But,
think it's kind of funny though. You're familiar with the Oregon,
oh, yes.
the eastern Oregon
Counties that
joining
want
with
to join Idaho,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, that's probably going nowhere as
No.
well.
Yeah.
But it's indicative of an attitude, you know.
And that attitude is a long-standing attitude in Spokane Valley, because the idea of self-government, self-representation, and you know, complete control over what the government does to you out in that geographical area was the whole impetus of forming a city in the first place.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, the history of that, a lot of folks don't know that history, but they were, you know, felt as though as a part of the county, they were just being ignored.
And they were.
And they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if there's a question in your mind about that, just look at the 4th legislative district and the folks they elect and their voting record and stuff like that. Yeah,
That's a
we
good
are
point.
independent. We
Yep.
are on the conservative side of the plate,
Yep.
and damn proud of it, actually.
So you've been a council member, a mayor in Spokane Valley from 2013 to the present day. And so you've seen an awful lot of the development of the strengths and weaknesses, the desires of the public to achieve certain things, and the folks who are the naysayers. You've been around that whole culture for quite some time. What, as a councilman, an incumbent councilman, are you intending to bring to the future of Spokane Valley?
Steady hand on the tiller, if you will. I think we've probably acquired enough parkland for the time being. There was a time when we weren't sure where our finances were going with COVID. We thought we were going to take another hit like we did in 2008, and we were trying to conserve our money, and it wasn't working with the current majority. And so I'm not saying that we, as it turns out, in all fairness, we're actually doing better than we were before. I mean, we're actually increasing our revenues. Is that some kind of a quirk? Is it a head fake before the cliff comes, or what? I don't know. But we shouldn't be spending all of our future money. We were talking about infrastructure here for a bit. One of the things that we need to do is get a handle on our roads. We have the best roads in the county right now. We got to keep them that way. But you do that with money. And we just completed a study, and now we've got a committee trying to look at just how good do we want our roads to be. If we want a high level, how do we pay for it? What are we willing to pay for it with? You get the picture, okay? So sometime probably late this year, we're going to be taking that up. Personally, I would like to see a very consistent source of revenue. Okay. Um, we thought we had one back when we did a telephone tax, and probably from its inception, it was taking a dive, and it still is. Okay. With electronics, not electronics, technology being what it is, you can't these days necessarily put a handle on something that you can depend on for a number of years. So we may be doing a lot of patchwork here. I don't know. Right now, we're taking it out of general fund. However, word of caution, when you don't patch that first pothole, you're behind the curve. When you don't have money to do it, you're way behind the curve. And when you're looking at Spokane, who just recently did a big bond issue to fix their roads, in some places they did a great job. But the thing that bothers me as an individual, and I don't live there, of course, is that when when those bonds are paid for, before those bonds are paid for, you're going to have to fix those roads again.
Again, yeah. So that's true.
Yeah.
One last question for you.
Yeah.
How can folks get in touch with your campaign, and how can they connect with you?
Well, my phone number is 509-990-4028. That's my cell phone. You'll get me personally. My campaign is re-elect, no hyphen, Rod Higgins at .us.
.us?
Yeah. I thought there was another thing in there, and there's not. I haven't used it that much.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you very much for joining us today. He is Rod Higgins, and he is an incumbent city councilman in Spokane Valley. And that's it for Let's Talk today. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons. Hey, thank you for joining.